Hello, thank you, and welcome for another DTV episode. Today, it's really quite interesting. Data is a hot topic, and we've got Mark Etherington as the CTO of Crux Informatics, where he oversees the entire platform engineering, data engineering, as well as a whole set of new IT initiatives. He's got a vast amount of experience in terms of building and distribution of major systems for international businesses and has great insights about data in general. Mark, thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Avery. Looking forward to the conversation.
One of the things that, data supply systems, are extremely complex with all sorts of inflows and outflows. And on one side, you've got the data suppliers. On the other hand, you've got consumers, all sorts of analytics and cloud warehouses. Could you kind of help people to start to understand a data supply chain? It's a confusing topic.
So I think at a highest level, it's relatively straightforward. The way that we look at this, the supply chain is all encompassing. The interesting thing we're seeing is also that even though you're taking data, we're seeing quite a few instances where consumers, or what you would classically view as a consumer of data, also becoming the publisher of data as well. The analytics providers and the cloud warehouses are, frankly, depends on which way you look at this, but they're in different parts of the chain. The cloud warehouses are positioning themselves as either a tool for a supplier, a tool for a consumer, or indeed as a transport to allow you to share data between them. The analytics providers are either an exhaust of the system and are actually being used by the consumers themselves on their own platforms or indeed in the cloud, or they're in the middle, adding analytical information into the process as we go, or they're in both the middle, the front, and the back, trying to actually provide value to the data sets in question to allow more value to be extracted from them. The trouble for the consumers is that you need to be able to basically run all of this across multiple suppliers. And honestly, the challenge for the suppliers is they have to run multiple different ways of actually communicating with all the different consumers.
Actually, I mean, the whole idea originally for cloud was to simplify and centralize the data. At least, I mean, that's how I always thought of it. But now the cloud itself has fragmented with not just, multiple clouds, but also multiple pools of data and multiple sets of quality and rights around some of those different data. So
Absolutely.
how has this changed how you think about management and operation?
Wow. Now, most of us think about, the big players, the Googles, the Microsofts, the Amazons of the world, yeah? But the reality are there's tens of cloud providers, each with their niche, each in their own specific regions, each with a subtly different play, whether you're a small company and you want, a cheaper version of Amazon. A lot of them try to do the same type of, protocols around it. But at the end of the day, there's lots of different players in the market. Now, that may consolidate over time, but it's an interesting play. Yeah, you see consumers think of it quite straightforwardly because their organizations have picked one, typically one. The suppliers have all of them. If they really want to maximize their destinations, they have to actually connect to all of them. And then it doesn't get any easier. When you look at it, there's lots and lots and lots of different ways of actually getting data to an end consumer. And the end consumer wants it in the way that almost you're guaranteed to not have. And then that puts an onus on the suppliers to actually build this up on top.
It's interesting. With clouds, there was early on in clouds, people would talk about the fact that you want to have herds and not pets for your servers. That you don't want to have, you don't want to have to know about the differences between each server. You just want them, I have 100 of web servers. In much the same way, it sounds like what you're doing is to take a bunch of those different inputs and condition them in such a way that the consumer can view them as a herd and not a bunch of, you're bringing, 12 pets with 12 sets of idiosyncrasies to the table.
It's a very astute observation. You want the data you want it to retain its own individuality. That's what gives it value, but you want to put a wrapper around it that makes it accessible to everybody. And that's what every company builds. They're all building them to meet their own internal standard, the way they represent data. And they're the same, but not quite the same. They're always similar in terms of what they're trying to do. What we're doing is putting that wrapper around for every feed that we take and every mechanism we support.
It's interesting. One of the value propositions of data is that with data is you don't get locked in. You can share without constraints of centralization, which is given rise to Snowflake, and so by all appearances, well received, certainly by the market. So, what's your view of cloud warehouses, and
Yep.
what kind of advice would you give to people, because it's on everybody's mind right now?
Well, let's put a bit more on my background and data. I think that, so having run large distributed environments for the banks, I was always being asked, well, make sure we don't get locked in. The question is not, can you insulate yourself from change perfectly? You can't. The question is the degree that you're comfortable with, yeah? And the same is true, I think, with the cloud warehouses. A database decision is a big decision. It is not something to be done lightly. Now, what I've seen is platforms like Snowflake and BigQuery is a good comparison between the two, to be honest, is a raising of awareness of sharing. Now, everybody says sharing, but and thinks that's fantastic. But when you actually look at what these guys have done, it's actually quite amazing, because I was talking to someone yesterday at one of the major banks, and the person is like clearly been in the industry for years and years and years, and we both had a small chortle. Sadly, at the end of the conversation, I went, "It's just like magic," because you can be in a position where I can, in either of these technologies, say that Avery, you're going to get the data table. Is it there? And there's no setup. So that level of removing the impedance for transfer of data between the organizations is a huge benefit. And Snowflake's IPO really raised the awareness of what that was doing. It's absolutely fantastic from that perspective. The problem is that when you dig under the covers, what's actually happening here to the value chain? Well, there's a couple of things. The first off, if that's all you do with it, you've bought yourself a really expensive FTP replacement. Because whilst you've missed all of the connectivity, what are you going to do at the other end? So if a consumer's made a strategic decision to, say, adopt Snowflake, they get all the benefits that Snowflake no doubt will tell you about. But what's interesting about it is they have to use the data there, or they're extracting it and they're going to run it through pipelines. That makes it FTP, okay? And that's not right. And I don't think either of these players would want that either. Really, you have to make a decision about what your database is. And the ability to actually take data in easily from suppliers is a very nice side effect. It's not the prime necessary reason you're doing it, but it should be a side effect of doing it. You need to really make a strategic decision on your database. The other piece of the equation is the commercials. I would agree that a network of, if you like, consumers and suppliers actually running to a cloud warehouse and distributing data like this is clearly beneficial for the market. It's lower cost, lower effort. It does not mean that the effort has disappeared. It just means it's moved. So where the overhead, if I'm supplying data to a firm over Snowflake, I must personally be a Snowflake consumer. I must have loaded the data into the system. As a supplier would actually have to onboard, integrate their systems, make sure their BCP was working, make sure the authentication is working, integrate their entitlement system so they know Avery is Avery and Avery is going to get the data. That effort of integration is significant, more significant than actually integrating into, say, S3. Now, neither of them are free, but integrating to a database, making sure your loads happen all the time, making sure that you can actually reconcile, making sure you can tell the client that data's been loaded is not an insubstantial amount of work. Because these warehouses are not cheap to adopt, and they do cost money to run. And on a supply chain perspective, that movement of value or cost has moved from the consumer more to the supplier. So inevitably, what happens at the back end of this is it will cost more, at least on a pure license basis, for the data that's going via one channel over another channel. Now, over time, I think it's still the right thing to do, because sharing is better than materializing data. But you can't avoid an uptick in cost in the process.
There's a lot more that we could explore on this, and I think you guys have got a summit coming up where instead of the snack, you can get more of, shall I say, the full meal. That's not it.
So it's up on our website, which is www.cruxinformatics.com, or on LinkedIn. It's free to come along. just sign up. There are some fantastic talkers there. We've got a lot of voice of the market. It's not just Crux customers. We've got people coming in there that are from the major banks. We've got professors from universities attending. It's the 17th, 18th, and 19th of November.
Thank you for the time. And for those of you watching, thank you for joining another DTV episode. Please subscribe, and thanks again for your time, Mark, and look forward to continuing to work with you.
Fantastic. Very nice. Thanks very much, Avery.